My name is Abby. I am 34 years old, and I was standing in a Chicago courtroom watching my own family try to erase my sanity and steal my life. I had survived a sniper bullet in Syria, but nothing prepared me for the betrayal waiting at home. My sister-in-law, a woman who prided herself on her powerful political connections, smiled as the judge ordered me to strip the Navy Cross from my uniform. She thought she had won my $4 million inheritance. She had no idea that the small black flash drive in my pocket was about to destroy her entire empire and send the judge straight to federal prison. If you have ever had to smile while toxic family members tried to destroy you, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe to hear how I burned their lies to the ground. Miss Mitchell, remove that metal from your lapel immediately. The heavy wooden gavel slammed against the sounding block, echoing through the sterile courtroom. Judge Thomas Arrington glared down at me from his elevated bench, his face twisted in absolute disgust. This is a court of law, not a community theater for your stolen valor act. I will not have you parading around in fake military honors to manipulate this proceeding. I stood completely still. Less than 10 feet away, sitting at the plaintiff table, was my sister-in-law, Kendra. She adjusted the sleeves of her tailored designer blazer and offered me a sickeningly sweet, victorious smirk. Kendra came from a prominent African-American family, deeply rooted in Chicago real estate and local politics. She possessed old money, vast influence, and a ruthless need for absolute control over everyone in her orbit. Sitting right next to her, staring intently at his own shoes, was my older brother, Derek. The man I had shared my childhood with could not even muster the courage to look me in the eye while his wife tried to legally declare me insane. Kendra's attorney, a man whose hourly rate probably cost more than my first vehicle, stood up and buttoned his jacket. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of erratic, delusional behavior we outlined in our petition. My client, Mrs. Montgomery Mitchell, is simply trying to save her sister-in-law from herself. Abigail suffers from severe, unmanaged combat trauma. She was discharged from the military, and now she lives in a fantasy world where she believes she is a decorated war hero. It is tragic, truly, but allowing a woman in this state of severe psychosis to retain control over a $4 million financial trust is not just irresponsible, it is incredibly dangerous. We are respectfully asking the court to grant Kendra full conservatorship immediately to protect those assets from being squandered. My hands did not shake. My breathing did not accelerate. Years of treating wounded Marines under heavy artillery fire as a Navy corpsman had taught me exactly how to compartmentalize panic. I reached up to the lapel of my navy blue suit and carefully unclasped the heavy bronze cross. I felt the sharp pin against my thumb as I pulled it free, a grounding sensation of physical reality amidst a room full of absolute fiction. You paid this man $50,000 just to declare me incompetent, Kendra. My voice cut through the silence of the courtroom, steady and resonant. I did not yell. I did not need to. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my sister-in-law, ignoring the lawyer entirely. Or is this sudden deep concern for my mental health simply because grandfather left the entire $4 million trust to me instead of Derek? Kendra scoffed, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms defensively. Do not do this to yourself, Abby. You are sick. We are trying to get you the psychiatric help you desperately need before you hurt someone or end up homeless on the streets. Help! I stepped out from behind the defense table. I was representing myself, a choice that had made Judge Arrington openly laugh at me just an hour prior. Is that what you call cornering Derek the day after our father died and forcing him to kick me out of my childhood home? Because you were terrified I would ask for my rightful share of the property. You do not care about my mental health. You care that your family's supposedly untouchable real estate empire is suddenly bleeding cash, and you are absolutely desperate to use my inheritance to plug the holes before the federal government notices. Objection! Kendra's lawyer shouted, his face reddening as he slammed his hand on the table. The respondent is spiraling into paranoid conspiracies again. This is entirely irrelevant to the certified medical evaluation we provided to the court. Sustained. Judge Arrington barked, pointing a thick finger directly at me. Miss Mitchell, I warned you about these outbursts. Your reckless accusations only prove the petitioner's point. You are clearly unwell and losing your grip on reality. I have read the psychiatric evaluation provided by Dr. Thorne. It paints a very disturbing picture of your mental faculties. If you speak out of turn one more time, I will hold you in contempt and have the bailiffs restrain you. Now place that fake piece of metal on the evidence table and step back. I walked slowly toward the center table. The room was suffocatingly quiet. I could feel Derek shifting uncomfortably in his seat, the guilt radiating off him in waves. But he remained a silent coward to the very end, too afraid of losing his lavish lifestyle to defend his own sister. I looked up at the judge, taking in his arrogant posture, the way he looked down at me like an insect he was preparing to crush under his shoe. "I will gladly comply with your order, Your Honor," I said, placing the bronze navy cross gently onto the polished wood. But as I pulled my hand back, I let a second object slip from my palm. A sleek black encrypted USB drive landed right next to the metal with a sharp metallic clink. Kendra frowned, leaning forward slightly, her perfect posture breaking as she tried to see what I had dropped. The judge narrowed his eyes, clearly annoyed by the theatrical delay. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. I stood up straight, squaring my shoulders, letting the disciplined posture of my military training take over. As a forensic financial investigator, I have learned that people can fake psychiatric evaluations. They can fake familial concern. And they can certainly fake their own wealth. But numbers never lie. Before you sign away my financial autonomy and my freedom, do you want to see the evidence I just submitted to the court clerk this morning? Because I promise you, what is on that drive is going to change everything. To understand how I ended up staring down a corrupt judge with a flash drive that held the power to ruin him, you have to go back exactly 72 hours. The absolute betrayal that landed me in that courtroom began at a Thanksgiving dinner table in a lavish Chicago penthouse. The penthouse belonged to my brother Derek and his wife Kendra. It was a sprawling multi-million-dollar property overlooking Lake Michigan, paid for entirely by Kendra's family. The Montgomery family was a powerhouse in Chicago real estate and local politics. Kendra never let anyone forget it. She was an impeccably dressed, highly educated African-American woman who carried herself like royalty, demanding absolute submission from everyone in her home. My brother Derek had married into her wealth 5 years ago, trading his dignity for designer suits and a luxury lifestyle he could never earn on his own. The dinner had been suffocating from the start. My parents, Richard and Patricia, were fawning over Kendra complimenting her expensive china and the catered holiday spread. I sat quietly at the end of the table sipping sparkling water, waiting for the evening to end. I had only attended because it was the first Thanksgiving since our grandfather passed away. Grandfather was the only person in our family who saw through Derek's laziness and my parents' superficial greed. When his will was read 2 months prior, the family was shocked to learn he had bypassed Derek entirely. He left his entire $4 million liquid trust to me. He knew I had discipline. I had served in the military, saved lives as a Navy corpsman, and built a solid career as a forensic accountant. He knew the money would be safe with me. Kendra had been furious ever since. Right as the catered turkey was being carved, the trap was sprung. Kendra stood up from her chair. She did not offer a toast. Instead, she reached onto the sideboard, picked up a thick manila folder, and dropped it right onto my dinner plate. The heavy thud silenced the entire room. I looked down at the folder, then up at her. "What is this, Kendra?" She smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made my military instincts flare. "It is a psychiatric evaluation, Abby, signed by a top medical professional in the city. As a prominent black family in the city, the Montgomerys cannot be associated with a loose cannon. Your military trauma makes you a liability. Your behavior has been erratic. We are filing an emergency petition for a conservatorship tomorrow morning to manage your $4 million trust. We cannot let a sick woman squander a family fortune." I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the documents. It was a formal psychiatric diagnosis, claiming I suffered from severe, violent, and unmanaged post-traumatic stress disorder. It claimed I was a danger to myself and others. It was signed by a Dr. Eris Thorne. I had never met a Dr. Eris Thorne in my entire life. I looked across the table at Derek. His face was pale. He was staring intensely at his wine glass, refusing to meet my gaze. You let your wife buy a fake medical diagnosis to steal my inheritance. I asked, my voice dangerously calm. You are going to let her legally declare me insane so you can take control of my bank accounts. My father, Richard, slammed his fist on the table, rattling the expensive silverware. Do not embarrass your brother, Abby. Kendra is doing you a favor. Her family has power and resources in Chicago that you do not understand. You have always been unstable, running off to a war zone instead of settling down. Just sign the consent forms. Let Kendra and Derek manage the money. It is the best thing for everyone. My mother, Patricia, chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. We are only thinking of your well-being, darling. You do not know how to handle $4 million. Kendra has financial advisors. Just cooperate. Do not make this ugly. I sat there surrounded by the people who were supposed to be my blood, listening to them eagerly sell me out to a wealthy tyrant. They were not trying to help me. They were trying to strip away my fundamental human rights. A conservatorship meant I would lose control of my finances, my medical decisions, and my freedom. I would be legally reduced to the status of a child permanently trapped under Kendra's thumb. I looked at the legal consent forms attached to the back of the fake medical evaluation. There was a pen resting right beside my plate. Kendra pointed to the bottom line. Sign it, Abby. If you make us take this to court, it will be a public spectacle. The judge will look at your combat record, look at this doctor's evaluation, and lock you in a ward. Do the smart thing. My mind raced. Complaining would do nothing. Screaming at them would only play into their narrative that I was unstable. I was a forensic financial investigator. I hunted hidden assets and corporate fraud for a living. I knew that people like Kendra did not orchestrate elaborate, highly illegal schemes just for the fun of it. Wealthy people do not risk federal perjury charges unless they are absolutely desperate for cash. Something was wrong with the Montgomery Empire, and I needed to know exactly what it was. I closed the folder and stood up slowly. I pushed my chair back, keeping my movements deliberate and controlled. I am not signing anything, I said, maintaining direct eye contact with Kendra. And I am leaving. Derek finally looked up, panic flashing in his eyes. Abby, wait. You cannot just leave. We have already filed the preliminary paperwork. The police can force a medical hold if you act erratic. I ignored him. I turned my back on the dining table and walked down the long, art-filled hallway of their penthouse. I heard Kendra shouting behind me, telling my father to stop me from leaving the apartment. I walked toward the front foyer where the coats were kept, but I did not stop there. I knew Derek's habits. I knew that whenever they hosted these lavish family dinners, he retreated to his private home office to escape his wife's overbearing presence. I knew he was careless with his digital security. I took a sharp right turn down the guest corridor. I reached the heavy oak door of Derek's private office, turned the brass knob, and slipped inside. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glowing screen of his laptop resting on the mahogany desk. I closed the door behind me and threw the deadbolt, locking myself in. The real war was about to begin. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing me inside the dark office. The only light came from the glowing screen of Derek's laptop resting on the mahogany desk. I took a deep breath, letting the muffled sounds of Kendra shouting in the hallway fade into the background. I did not have much time. I walked over to the desk and tapped the spacebar. The screen woke up, demanding a password. I pulled my specialized encrypted flash drive from my pocket. As a forensic financial investigator, I carried software that could bypass most commercial security systems, but looking at the password prompt, I realized I probably did not even need it. My brother was a creature of incredibly lazy habits. While I had spent my entire life fighting for every scrap of respect, studying late into the night, and pushing myself through brutal military training, Derek had coasted on minimal effort. He always took the path of least resistance. I typed in the name of his childhood golden retriever, followed by his high school graduation year. The screen instantly unlocked. It was pathetic, really. A man who claimed he was responsible enough to manage a $4 million trust could not even be bothered to update his digital security in over a decade. I plugged my flash drive into the port and ran a discrete extraction program. I bypassed his personal files and went straight for the shared network drives. Derek was an executive vice president at the Montgomery Real Estate Group, a title Kendra had simply handed to him on their wedding day. I knew he would have access to the master ledgers. My fingers flew across the keyboard opening spreadsheets, tax returns, and internal bank statements. What I saw made my blood run cold. The Montgomery family projected an image of untouchable generational wealth. They hosted charity galas, funded political campaigns, and flaunted their billionaire status across Chicago. But the numbers told a completely different story. I pulled up the internal accounting for their flagship charity foundation and cross-referenced it with their commercial property holdings. It was a massive, fragile house of cards. They had been over-leveraging properties to pay off other loans, effectively running a high-end Ponzi scheme through dummy corporations. I kept digging, following the rapid flow of hidden liabilities until I hit the mother lode. It was a highly confidential notice from the Internal Revenue Service. The Montgomerys were currently under a covert federal audit. They owed $12 million in back taxes, corporate fraud penalties, and unpaid capital gains. If they did not pay a massive chunk of that debt within the next 30 days, the federal government was going to freeze their assets and hand down federal indictments. The sheer panic in the numbers was obvious. They were entirely illiquid. Their assets were tied up in underwater mortgages and failing commercial spaces. They were broke, desperate, and facing years in federal prison. Suddenly, the fake psychiatric evaluation they had thrown at me during dinner made perfect sense. They did not care about my mental health. They did not even care about controlling my life choices. They were backed into a corner, staring down federal prosecution, and I had just inherited a $4 million liquid trust from our grandfather. If they could successfully declare me legally incompetent, Derek would be granted full conservatorship over my finances as my next of kin. They would instantly drain my accounts to pay off the IRS, saving the Montgomery Empire and leaving me penniless and trapped in a psychiatric ward. My own brother was willing to strip away my basic human rights and lock me in a hospital just to cover his wealthy wife's tax fraud. Disgust washed over me, replacing any lingering sense of familial loyalty. I was no longer dealing with family. I was dealing with hostile combatants. I quickly copied the master ledgers, the IRS notices, and the shadow account records onto my encrypted flash drive. The progress bar crept toward 100%. Every second felt like an hour. I kept my eyes on the door, listening to the heavy footsteps pacing furiously outside. Just as the transfer completed, and I safely ejected the drive, the brass doorknob beside me rattled violently. The heavy wood shook as someone threw their weight against it. "I know you are in there, you psycho!" Kendra hissed from the other side, her voice completely stripped of its usual refined elegance. "Open this door right now, or I am calling the police and telling them you have a weapon." I stepped back from the mahogany desk, slipping the encrypted flash drive into the palm of my hand. The heavy oak door shuddered again. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the brass doorknob, I could see the distorted shadow of my sister-in-law pacing like a caged predator. I did not say a word. I knew that any response, any raised voice would immediately be recorded or twisted to fit the narrative of the unhinged combat veteran they were trying to build. I simply watched the shadow raise something large and heavy. A tremendous crash shattered the silence of the penthouse. Shards of thick frosted glass exploded inward, raining across the Persian rug. Kendra had grabbed a massive marble vase from the hallway console and swung it directly through the door panel. She reached her hand through the jagged opening, flipped the deadbolt, and pushed the door wide open. But she did not attack me. Instead, Kendra looked at me with a chilling, calculated smile. She bent down and picked up a sharp 6-inch shard of broken glass from the door frame. Without breaking eye contact with me, Kendra dragged the sharp edge across her own left forearm, slicing through her expensive silk blouse. Blood immediately welled up, spilling over her wrist and dripping onto the hardwood floor. She dropped the bloody glass shard right at my feet. Then she opened her mouth and unleashed a blood-curdling, terrified scream. "Help me! Somebody help me!" "She has a weapon," Kendra shrieked, clutching her bleeding arm as she backed away into the hallway. Her performance was flawless. She stumbled against the wall, hyperventilating, painting a picture of absolute terror. I stood in the center of the office, completely still. My military training overrode the initial shock of her psychotic display. I assessed the tactical situation instantly. I was trapped in a room with broken glass, a bleeding woman, and a family that desperately needed me to look like a violent threat. If I moved toward her to offer first aid, it would look like an attack. If I ran, it would look like guilt. I stayed perfectly planted, keeping my hands visible at my sides. Seconds later, the pounding of heavy boots echoed down the corridor. Two private security guards from the luxury building rushed in, followed almost immediately by three Chicago police officers, with their hands resting on their holstered weapons. Kendra must have silently triggered the penthouse panic alarm the moment she realized I was locked inside the office. "Drop the weapon and put your hands where I can see them," the lead officer barked, stepping into the doorway and positioning himself between me and Kendra. "I have no weapon, officer," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat and modulated. I slowly raised both of my empty hands to shoulder height. "I am unarmed." Kendra collapsed against the hallway wall, sobbing hysterically into the arms of a female officer. "She went crazy." Kendra gasped, her voice trembling perfectly. "I came in to check on her because she was acting erratic at dinner. She just snapped. She smashed the door glass and came at me with a jagged piece. Look at my arm. She is a combat veteran. She has severe trauma. She kept screaming that she was going to kill us all." I looked past the police officers. My brother Derek and my parents Richard and Patricia were huddled at the end of the hallway. The lead police officer turned to them. "Is this true? Did you witness her acting aggressively?" Derek looked at his wife's bleeding arm, then at the police. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He knew I had never touched her, but he also knew about the $12 million IRS debt I had just uncovered on his laptop. He made his choice. "Yes," Derek lied, his voice shaking. "My sister has violent trauma. We brought her here for Thanksgiving to stage a medical intervention. We tried to get her to sign commitment papers for her own good, but she lost her mind and locked herself in my office. When my wife tried to coax her out, she attacked. She is sick, officer," my mother added, playing the tragic, heartbroken parent perfectly. "She needs to be locked up before she kills someone. Please, just take her to a hospital. We have been living in fear of her for months." The betrayal was absolute. My own flesh and blood were standing 10 feet away, handing me over to the authorities on fabricated assault charges, just to protect a failing real estate empire. The lead officer unclipped his metal handcuffs and stepped toward me. "Miss, turn around and face the wall. Interlock your fingers behind your head." "I am complying, officer," I stated clearly. I turned slowly. As I pivoted, I intentionally stumbled just a fraction of an inch, letting my knee buckle slightly, as if I had lost my footing on the slick hardwood floor. In that split second, out of the line of sight of the officers behind me, I dropped the black encrypted flash drive from my palm. With a swift, practiced movement of my foot, I kicked the drive straight into the deep collar of my tactical boot, letting it slide securely beneath my ankle. By the time I placed my hands behind my head, the digital key to the Montgomery family's destruction was safely hidden on my person. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped tight around my wrists. The officer patted me down quickly, finding nothing but my wallet and my car keys. No weapons, no sharp glass. But the narrative had already been set, and in a high-end Chicago penthouse, with a bleeding wealthy socialite pointing the finger, the truth did not matter to the police. "Abigail Mitchell, you are under arrest for aggravated assault," the officer stated as he marched me toward the door. Kendra peeked out from behind the paramedic who was now bandaging her self-inflicted wound. The terrified, sobbing victim facade vanished for a fraction of a second. She shot me a cold, dead-eyed smirk. She thought she had won. She thought she had neutralized the threat and secured her path to my $4 million trust. "We are not taking her to the precinct," a second officer said, looking at a clipboard handed to him by Derek. The brother just provided a signed psychiatric evaluation from a Dr. Eris Thorne, declaring her an immediate danger to society. The lead officer nodded, tightening his grip on my arm. "Change of plans, Miss Mitchell. Given your combat history and this medical directive, we are bypassing the holding cell. We are taking you straight to the psychiatric ward on a 72-hour involuntary medical hold." The heavy metal doors of the psychiatric wing locked behind me with a loud hollow thud that echoed down the sterile corridor. The police officers handed my custody paperwork to the intake staff at the front desk and walked away without looking back. I was led down a brightly lit hallway that smelled sharply of bleach and floor wax. Two orderlies pointed me toward a small windowless changing room and handed me a set of scratchy paper hospital scrubs. They instructed me to remove my civilian clothes so they could be inventoried and locked away. I knew the protocol. I knew they would search every pocket and seam of my clothing. As soon as the changing room door clicked shut, I quickly reached into my tactical boot and retrieved the black encrypted flash drive. It was the only piece of leverage I had left in the world. I slipped out of my navy blue suit and pulled on the flimsy paper pants. I unrolled the thick elastic waistband, tucked the small drive tightly into the fold against my bare skin, and rolled the waistband securely back over it. It was completely invisible. I handed my folded clothes through the door to the orderly, keeping my posture relaxed and compliant. They placed me in an isolation room with pale green walls and a single mattress bolted directly to the linoleum floor. The heavy door locked from the outside. I did not pace. I did not cry. I sat perfectly still in the dead center of the mattress, crossed my legs, and regulated my breathing. My military training took over, slowing my heart rate. I was a prisoner, but I was not a victim. I knew they would send someone to break me, and I needed a clear head for the fight. 2 hours later, the heavy door swung open. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit beneath a pristine white lab coat walked into the room. His silver name badge read Dr. Eris Thorne. He carried a metal clipboard and a small plastic cup containing 2 heavy white pills. A broad-shouldered male night nurse stepped in behind him, remaining silently by the doorframe. Dr. Thorne looked down at me with a condescending, predatory smile. "Abigail Mitchell," he said, his voice dripping with fake, manufactured sympathy. "You have had a very rough night. Your sister-in-law is absolutely terrified. Your brother is heartbroken. You suffered a severe psychotic break at the dinner table." I did not break eye contact. "I am completely lucid, Dr. Thorne. And you and I both know I never attacked anyone." Thorne chuckled softly, stepping closer to the mattress. He set the clipboard down next to my knee. "This is the tragic reality of combat trauma, Abby. You washed out of the Navy, you came home a broken woman, and now you are a danger to society. Your brain simply cannot separate reality from the war zone. But there is a way out of this room. Kendra Montgomery is incredibly generous. She is willing to fund your long-term care in a beautiful private psychiatric facility. But you need to cooperate." He picked up the plastic cup and held it out to me. "Take these pills. Calm your mind. Tomorrow morning when the court-appointed lawyer arrives, sign the conservatorship consent forms, letting your brother manage your trust fund. If you do that, I will sign a medical release stating your medication is working and you are compliant. If you refuse, I will testify before a judge that you are hopelessly schizophrenic and need to be committed to a state hospital indefinitely." I looked at the pills in the cup, then slowly looked back up at his arrogant face. "Lorazepam," I stated flatly. 2 milligrams each. A heavy central nervous system depressant used for acute panic attacks. You are attempting to chemically restrain a patient who is presenting 0 signs of physical or verbal agitation. Under the Illinois Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities Code, administering psychotropic medication without informed consent to a nonviolent patient is a direct violation of my civil rights. Dr. Thorne stopped smiling. His jaw tightened as the fake sympathy vanished from his eyes. I did not stop. Furthermore, writing a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation for financial gain constitutes medical malpractice, conspiracy, and federal wire fraud. And for the record, Dr. Thorne, I did not wash out of the Navy. I am a trained Navy corpsman. I was honorably discharged. I took a sniper round to my left shoulder while pulling a bleeding Marine out of a burning transport vehicle in Syria. That is why the Secretary of the Navy pinned the Navy Cross on my uniform. You are completely out of your depth, and you picked the wrong combat veteran to gaslight." Thorne snatched the plastic cup off the mattress. His face flushed dark red with anger. He turned sharply to the night nurse standing by the door. "Restrain her," Thorne snapped. "She is non-compliant, delusional, and hostile. Prep an intramuscular sedative immediately. I am going to my office to draft the indefinite commitment order. She is not leaving this ward." He stormed out of the room, his expensive leather shoes echoing aggressively down the hall. I remained perfectly still on the mattress, keeping my hands resting visibly on my knees. I shifted my gaze to the night nurse. He stepped further into the room and let the heavy door swing shut behind him. His name tag read David. He looked at the doorway where the corrupt doctor had just disappeared, then looked back down at me. He did not pull out any leather restraints. He did not reach into his pocket for a syringe. I have worked in this psychiatric ward for 6 years, David said, his voice dropping to a low whisper. I know exactly what a psychotic break looks like. You do not have an elevated heart rate. You are not sweating. Your speech is perfectly organized and your pupils are completely normal. He took a step closer, glancing nervously at the small observation window in the door. And Thorne has been taking private meetings with the Montgomery family for a month, he continued. I saw Kendra Montgomery hand him a thick envelope in the parking garage last week. He makes me sick. He uses this ward as a dumping ground for wealthy families who want to silence their relatives. I watched him carefully, recognizing a potential ally in hostile territory. I need to make one phone call, I said quietly. Just one. I can blow this entire operation wide open, but I cannot do it from inside this cell. David reached deep into the pocket of his scrub pants. He pulled out a cheap prepaid burner phone. They monitor and record all the ward landlines, he said, sliding the small black phone across the mattress toward me. You have exactly 5 minutes before I am required to report back to the nurses' station. Make it count. I picked up the phone. I did not dial a local defense attorney. I did not dial my parents. I dialed a 10-digit secure number I had memorized years ago during my military service. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Yeah. This is Mitchell, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I need a massive favor. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. The man listening was a former Marine intelligence officer. He was the same man I had dragged out of that burning Humvee in Syria while taking enemy fire. He was now a senior special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, stationed right here in Chicago. I am locked in a psychiatric hold on fabricated medical charges, I continued. The Montgomery real estate family is trying to seize my assets to cover up a $12 million federal tax fraud and money laundering scheme. I have their master corporate ledgers secured on an encrypted drive on my person. I need you to pull my military service records, verify my Navy Cross, and get a tactical team ready to intercept a highly corrupt judge. Are you in? I heard the sharp sound of a chair scraping aggressively against a floor on the other end of the line. Give me the address of the ward, Abby, the federal agent said, his voice turning deadly cold. We are going hunting. The fluorescent lights in the psychiatric ward buzzed with a relentless low hum. I had been locked in that pale green room for exactly 68 hours. I spent the time executing mental exercises I had learned during my military survival training, keeping my mind razor sharp while the corrupt medical staff waited for me to break. They expected me to pace the floor. They expected me to scream at the reinforced door. They expected me to beg for a phone call to my parents. I did none of those things. I sat perfectly still on the bolted mattress and waited for the trap to spring. At 9 o'clock on the morning of the third day, the heavy metal door finally swung open. A man clutching a battered leather briefcase walked into the room. He wore a rumpled gray suit and looked thoroughly exhausted, carrying the distinct posture of a man who had spent his entire career pushing paper for people far more powerful than himself. The orderly closed the door behind him, leaving us alone in the sterile space. Abigail Mitchell, he said, not bothering to offer his hand. I am your court-appointed attorney. You can call me Mr. Wallace. We do not have much time, so I am going to be brutally honest with you. Your situation is catastrophic. I remained seated, my posture perfectly straight. Define catastrophic, Mr. Wallace. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and dropped them onto the end of my mattress. Your sister-in-law has formally filed the petition for a permanent conservatorship. She has sworn affidavits from your brother and your parents, stating you are a violent threat to society. She has a medical evaluation from Dr. Thorne recommending long-term institutionalization. And to make matters worse, she is pressing felony aggravated assault charges for the incident with the broken glass at the penthouse. I did not attack her, I stated calmly. She deliberately cut her own arm with a shard of glass from the door she destroyed. Wallace sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. It does not matter what actually happened. It only matters what they can prove. And in Chicago, the Montgomery family can prove whatever they want. They have the police report, they have the medical records, and most importantly, they have the judge. He tapped the top page of the file. Your emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The case has been assigned to Judge Thomas Arrington. I am going to save you the trouble of hoping for a fair trial. Judge Arrington has been deeply tied to the Montgomery Real Estate Group for 2 decades. They fund his re-election campaigns. He attends their charity galas. He has never, not once in his entire career on the bench, ruled against their family interests. If you walk into his courtroom tomorrow fighting this, he will rubber stamp Thorne's medical evaluation and send you to a state psychiatric facility indefinitely. You will never see the outside of a locked ward again. I looked at the documents, then up at Wallace. You are my defense attorney. You are supposed to advocate for my freedom. Instead, you are standing in my cell delivering a thinly veiled threat from the prosecution. What is the real reason you came here today? Wallace shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the small observation window in the door. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a separate, much thinner document. He slid it across the mattress toward me. I am here to offer you a lifeline, he said, lowering his voice. Kendra Montgomery is willing to make a deal. Sign this consent decree. It voluntarily surrenders administrative control of your $4 million trust to your brother Derek. In exchange, Kendra will drop the felony assault charges immediately. Dr. Thorne will sign a release stating you have stabilized and are fit to return to society. You walk out of here